Today we're taking an in-depth look at the CIDOO ABM066, which was sent over by the folks at CIDOO. But first we have to establish a naming convention for this board, because ABM066 is quite the mouthful that I cannot keep saying throughout the video. So let's just call it the ABM. Cool? Cool. The ABM is available pre-built for $90 and bare bones for $60. The currency dropdown doesn't seem to be working on the CIDOO Tech website, so these prices are from the EpoMaker website. As I mentioned in my CIDOO V65 video, CIDOO and EpoMaker seem to be related in some way based on the @EpoMaker support email listed on the CIDOO Tech website. The ABM is a tri-mode, 65% Alice layout mechanical keyboard with south-facing hot swap sockets, a plastic case, polycarbonate plate, volume knob, and TFT LCD screen. Despite its name and what's stated on the CIDOO Tech website, the board has 67 keys. The pre-built version comes with CIDOO Silent Blue switches and die-sub PBT keycaps in the MDA profile. I was sent both the pre-built and bare bones versions as well as 3 boxes of their mint linear switches. The ABM is a pretty elegant keyboard in my eyes. It is made of plastic but doesn't really feel flimsy or cheap. It is quite chunky though, with big bezels all around. The Alice layout also makes it very wide, even wider than the CIDOO V87, which is a TKL. The knob and screen are on the right edge of the keyboard, above the right arrow key, which probably forced this board's designers to move the navigation column over to the left. This has consequences in terms of usability, which I will go over in the layout chapter of this video. There's also this RGB ring under the nav column that doesn't seem to have any practical functionality. The USB port and mode toggle are located at the middle back of the board. On the bottom there are 2 stage feet and a slot for the wireless dongle. The board comes in black or white case colors with copper accents on the former and black on the latter. The pre-built version is only available in white and comes with thick dye-sublimated PBT keycaps in the rounded and curvy MDA profile. This is a sculpted profile that only has 3 distinct rows as opposed to the 4 of the cherry profile. Something strange here is the spacebar, which does not follow the sculpt of the rest of the keycaps, instead being perfectly symmetrical and flat. Okay, we have to talk about these hideous, garish, cutesy legends. They've got this hand-drawn style, but inexplicably also feature text in an ugly font on just 2 of the keys. The theme here seems to be Space Cat. As you can probably tell, it's really not my kind of thing. It's unique, for sure, but it's just a bit much. We have 2 switches to talk about here, the Silent Blues and the Mints. I really thought this would be a short, straightforward section, but I found some pretty interesting information. You may want to skip ahead to the next chapter if you don't want to get into manufacturers and all of the little design differences between the various parts of these switches. So first, those Silent Blues. These seem to only be available bundled with the pre-built version of the ABM. I was curious about the implementation of the silencing, so I opened one up and found these plastic bits that jut out of the top and bottom of the stem rails. These will bend upon hitting the switch housings on top out and bottom out, absorbing the forces and eliminating the sound. I'm not familiar with switch silencing mechanisms, so I sought out more information and found the exact right article written by none other than Theramin Goat, the preeminent expert on mechanical key switches. In the article, he featured silent switches by a manufacturer I'd never heard of before, CIDOO. The stems on those switches look exactly like the ones on the Silent Blues, which leads me to believe that they are the manufacturers for these CIDOO switches. Naturally, I assumed that they would also be the ones making the other CIDOO branded switches, the mats and the mints. However, upon closer inspection, it seems this is only true for the mats. The housings of the mats and Silent Blues are almost identical, with some very slight differences on the bottom housing that may just be due to updated molds from CIDOO. The light diffuser on the mats also fit into the Silent Blues. We can also see the 2 holes on the bottom housing featured in the Theramin Goat article. It's clear that the mints use a completely different mold for their housings, which indicates they're likely not made by CIDOO. The mints also don't have the holes on the bottom housing and their light diffusers are too big to fit into either of the mattes or silent blues. Lastly, here are some basic specs on these switches. The information on the respective product pages seems to be a little bit confused, as you can see from the spring lengths I measured versus the ones listed in the product pages. So I can't guarantee that the rest of this information is accurate, but there it is. Here we go again with another plastic board held together with tabs instead of screws. My worst nightmare. For this kind of complete teardown, you'll want to have all of the keycap switches and the knob removed from the keyboard. You will then have to undo the case tabs one at a time. I used a bunch of plastic tools from a repair kit I bought a while back. Here's the layout of those tabs. I would suggest starting at the front with the middle tab and going outward. The outermost ones will be tightest, and you may have to undo these alongside the ones on the sides of the board. I would suggest picking a side, left or right, and then continuing to the back, undoing the tab on the side you choose, going all the way along the perimeter of the board until every tab is undone, and the top case piece finally, mercifully, comes loose. Be careful at this point, as there is a ribbon cable connecting the screen to the PCB. There are also cables connecting the PCB with the battery and daughter board, and these are the ones you should disconnect first by carefully flipping everything over to get access to the bottom of the PCB. Next, you'll disconnect the screen from the PCB by pulling on this black locking tab on both sides and then carefully pulling the ribbon cable. This is the pre-built version of the ABM that I'm tearing down, and it does not have standoffs. It seems like the bare bones version has standoffs, judging by the screws on the plate that don't exist on the pre-built version. So if you have the bare bones version, you'll have to unscrew those standoffs first before you can separate the plate, PCB, and foams. You've got your obligatory thick sheets of foam underneath the plate as well as underneath the PCB. Under the plate foam, you've got your sound enhancing sheet of what I will assume is PE foam. What's curious here is a sheet of plastic stuck on top of the PCB. I saw something similar to this on the Fecker K75, but the plastic sheet there was attached to the sound enhancing foam instead of to the PCB. I still don't know exactly what these plastic sheets are for. Looking at the PCB, you'll find holes for screw-in stabilizers, but the board only comes with plate-mounted stabilizers. The ABM is configurable using VIA, but as always, you first have to load a JSON file through the Design tab, which you have to activate in the settings. There are two different JSON files available for download on the CIDOO Tech website, one for use in wired mode and the other for 2.4G wireless. Once you've got the JSON file loaded up, you can go to the Configure tab and choose the ABM from the device dropdown. You'll see the default layout here on layer 0, but it's not exactly the same as the actual keyboard's layout. First, the T and G keys are shown on the right side of the layout instead of the left. And second, the backspace key is shortened to make room for 3 keys that are for customizing the knob's function. The left one is for a counterclockwise turn, the middle is for a knob press, and the right is for a clockwise turn. Layer 1 contains your hotkeys for doing things like controlling the RGB, the screen, and switching between wireless devices. These functions can be found in the section labeled Custom. OLED power turns the screen on and off. OLED set cycles the screen image, which we will talk more about later in this chapter. LED logo mode and LED logo color are for controlling the RGB ring underneath the nav column. By default, the H key is mapped to a custom function that's labeled Custom 12. However, this does not appear among the keys in the custom section. I don't know what it's supposed to do. Activating it once will cause the RGB to flash, but subsequent activations seem to do nothing. To add your own image or animation to the ABM's TFT LCD screen, you will need to download and use the custom image tool from the CIDOO Tech website. There are some drawing and animation tools here like we saw on the Fecker K75, but they're similarly rudimentary, so you will likely just want to upload stuff from the web or made in other apps. The screen seems to be 96 by 160 pixels, which is a 3:5 aspect ratio. I literally had to count the boxes displayed on the software to find this out. It's a pretty unusual aspect ratio, so you may have some trouble finding images that will fit properly. This problem is exacerbated by the fact that the software will squish and stretch any image that doesn't follow this exact ratio instead of adding black bars like the Fecker K75 does. This is a huge bummer. For me, there is never a situation where where deforming an image is preferable to adding black bars. This could be a big problem for you if you don't know how to use something like Photoshop to adjust the image to fit and display properly. The screen is pretty tiny and low resolution, so images with a lot of small details don't end up looking very good on it. Something like this Hisuian Growlithe by Jon Davies looks fine because it's a pretty low-res pixel art piece in the first place. However, something much more detailed and high resolution, like this animation of Red's room from Pokemon by Brandon James Greer, doesn't look very good. The viewing angles are also pretty poor, so you likely won't even get to see the image from your normal typing position. You do get the option to switch between two images using the OLED set function I mentioned earlier. You can also use this to revert back to the default screen setting, which shows the time, date, connection mode, and battery status. The Alice layout is widely touted as the superior ergonomic experience when compared with the conventional keyboard layout. And I guess I believed it because I went into this review thinking I would have zero issues adjusting to the layout. Well, I was pretty wrong. Some of this has to do with the navigation column being on the left though, which is not something that all Alice keyboards feature. You see, before I learned proper touch typing, I would situate myself on the keyboard by locating the very left edge of the board with my left pinky. Not the leftmost keys, the actual left edge of the keyboard case. It seems this behavior still exists in me when I'm pressing the leftmost keys, tab, caps lock, etc. And because there are extra keys on the ABM's left side, this does throw me off. Another consequence of the nav column location is my inability to find the delete key. It's always supposed to be on the right side, so I'm always reaching for it with my right hand. What I've had to do is map the delete function to the pipe key. I may just carry this mapping over to every keyboard I use from now on. The added distance between the F and J keys has also made it hard for me to locate them by feel. The left hand is usually fine, but my right hand tends to stick too closely to my left hand. And this layout has also made me realize that I don't even touch type 100% properly on the alphas. I knew I didn't with the number row and symbols and modifiers, but I found out that I actually press the Y key with my left hand a lot, even though it's supposed to be pressed with the right. I think I also alternate between left and right hand on the B key, which is fine here since there are two B keys. The final issue is the number 6 key. Proper touch typing, at least how I learned it, dictates that the 6 key be pressed with the right hand. But on this board, and seemingly every other Alice layout keyboard, the 6 key is on the left side. I guess it makes sense since the 6 key is much closer to the left hand than the right. Of course, all of these issues would eventually disappear with enough use of the keyboard. Never underestimate human adaptability, but that isn't really an option for me, unfortunately, since I own a lot of keyboards in different layouts. So if this is the only keyboard you're planning on using, then the layout shouldn't be an issue for long. As for comfort and ergonomics, I don't know what to tell you. I never noticed any strain with the conventional layout, and I don't see any kind of improvement or advantage with the Alice layout. One final thing to note is compatibility with keycap sets. There are multiple keys here that could provide difficulty. There's that extra B, depending on what you decide to map that key to. The entire bottom row is pretty unconventional, with 1.5, 1.25, and 1U keys, not to mention those 2.25U and 2.75U spacebars. Of course, you can just put shift keys on those spacebars, but even if you do that, there can still be issues. I tried using my Max Key Foundation SA keycaps on the ABM, but SA has a different row 5 than its row 4, meaning the shift keys end up different from the rest of the bottom row. The colorway can be an issue too, as you can see again with this Max Key Foundation set. If the modifiers and alphas are the same color, then you're fine, but if they're not, then you end up with a bottom row that's all the same color, which is an unconventional look that I personally find quite ugly. Let's first listen to our two ABM keyboards stock. On the bare bones version, I put the mint switches along with my Geek Arc PBT keycap set. This is my very first experience with silent switches, and as expected, it's just not my kind of thing. They feel quite mushy, and true to their name, do not sound like anything at all, which is deeply unsatisfying. You can hear some pinging on them if you put them right up against your ear, but it's not audible during normal typing. The Mint switches, on the other hand, sound quite good, with a satisfying loudness and pop. These are pre-lubed and don't display any sort of unpleasant sounds, nothing scratchy, rattly, metallic, or pingy. Next, let's put the switches that came with both the CIDOO V65 and V87, the mats, onto the ABM and see how they stack up against the Mint switches. I'll use GeekArc PBT keycaps on both versions of the board. To my ears, there's not really much of a difference in sound between these two, which isn't all that surprising considering how similar they are to each other. Next, let's try the tape mod. I removed the case foam to make room for the tape. Surprisingly, the tape does not seem to have made much of a difference to the sound either. Let me know what you heard. The last thing I'd like to try is putting different switches and keycaps into the two ABMs. Here's how I set them up. I'll put these extended sound tests at the very end of the video, so please stay tuned for that. Going into this review, there were two standout features of the CIDOO ABM066 that I was really looking forward to experiencing. First is the Alice style layout, and second, the TFT LCD screen. Unfortunately, neither one really lived up to my expectations. As I discussed in the layout chapter of this video, the layout ended up being more of a hindrance than benefit, and the screen ended up being quite disappointing compared to the one on the Fecker K75. So does this mean I'm giving the ABM a thumbs down? No, that would be unfair. Layout preference is personal, and as I said, you can resolve any layout issues by just using the board long enough to get used to it. As for the screen, it's not all that great for displaying images, but the default setting with the clock is useful and still visible from a normal typing position. The ABM is a pretty feature-packed keyboard with a knob, screen, and 3 connection modes. It sounds good right out of the box, has solid construction, and looks good too, although it is quite big for a 65%. I wouldn't recommend the pre-built version because the switches and keycaps are not very good in my opinion. If it had some non-silent switches and some more conventional looking keycaps, then yes, I do think it's worth its $90 price tag. The bare bones version is the one I can recommend without reservation. $60 for everything that the ABM has to offer is a pretty damn good deal, and one that I think you should definitely hop on. And that concludes my look at the CIDOO ABM066. What do you think about this keyboard? Has this review convinced you to get one? Do you have the same issues that I do with the Alice layout? Are you into silent switches? Let us know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching.